I never knew a human voice could keep living in your head after the person was gone. Not like a memory, not like, oh yeah, I remember how they sounded, but like an old cassette stuck on loop somewhere behind your eyes. It's weird what you keep. I don't remember my graduation speech, or what I wore to prom, or half the names of the kids I sat next to for 12 years. But I can hear Mr. Harlan saying, "Look up, eyes on me," as clear as if he's standing over my shoulder right now. The only way to tell this is to tell it straight. No spooky embellishments, no dramatic flair. I'm past that. You can judge for yourself if I'm being over the top. I hope you do, honestly. I hope this sounds too much. Because if it doesn't, you'll carry his voice too. We called him Harlan, like he was one of those teachers who thinks using first names makes them cool. He taught film studies and English lit at our high school, and he was the kind of guy who made everyone want to do better without yelling. He'd do that thing where he leaned back against his desk, sleeves rolled to his elbows, eyes half squinting behind those thick black frames, and you felt like you were in a movie. The background would blur, and you were the protagonist under the spotlight. When he talked about character, it felt like confession. When he talked about editing, it felt like he understood how you cut pieces of your day into something that could be survived. He could give a pass to the varsity kids who forgot their homework, or spend an hour after class with the weird kid who just wanted to show him a video of streetlights flickering. He was charismatic. That's the word nobody wanted to say after everything, but it's the right one. He filled the space in front of him. Senior year, I took both his classes. I liked cameras. I liked stories. I liked that he called me Ramirez, like a coach even though I never played anything. I liked that he didn't laugh when I said I wanted to make documentaries. He said good documentaries are about seeing what people pretend not to, which sounds like a poster you'd find in a dorm. But the way he said it felt like an encouragement and a dare. The first time I heard him say, "Look up, eyes on me," he was teaching us to frame interviews. Everyone slouched in those plastic seats, blue pens clicking, the clock just loud enough to make you angry at time itself. He walked between our rows with a battered Canon DSLR and the neck strap hanging loose. He held the camera over us, shooting down. "If you want to make people look small, like they're prey," he said in this calm way, "you shoot from above." He tilted the camera up at his chin so we were looking up his nose and laughed with a bunch of us. "If you want them to look big, powerful, or scary, low angle. You crouch, you kneel, you get on the ground, you make your back hurt for the shot." Then he put the camera on the desk and made a little triangle with his fingers. But the best trick is just to be the person they trust to hold the camera. People tell you everything when there's glass between you and them. Now, look up. Eyes on me. You can imagine how many times we sparked that phrase back at him over the next few months. People would shout it in the cafeteria. He'd lean into it in class, smile when he said it, like he knew we were all in on the joke. Look up, eyes on me. Our group chat used it as a signature for a few weeks. We were 4 in our crew. Me, Shay, twin brothers Drew and Evan, and sometimes Misha, if she wasn't doing sports journalism. Shay was going to NYU to write screenplays. Drew and Evan were impossible to separate even if they tried. We were the ones who thought we were going to make something of ourselves, which is so hilarious and stupid and heartbreaking when I think about it now. We'd stay late in the editing lab with Harlan, eating stale pretzels from the vending machine and cutting our little short films about nothing. He'd watch them and pause at weird moments and say, "There, that's a human moment." Then he'd tell us to build around that. He had a way of naming things in you that you hadn't even decided were there yet. Shay says none of us are responsible for what came next. I know she believes it when she says it. I believe it in the daylight. But the brain is a shitty lawyer and an excellent archivist. It keeps receipts that make no legal sense. Like the time I laughed when Harlan imitated the math teacher's voice, or the way my stomach buzzed when he asked me to show him the footage I shot on weekends. Every little thing slots into a case against you. I can hear my own defense collapsing. It started with a missing person, not one of us. A girl from a town over named Lily. She wasn't in our school, but people knew people. Screenshots of her Instagram started going around with hashtags and helpline numbers. She had braces and that kind of smile that you can feel even when it's pixelated. The kind that makes you think of summers and sunburns and iced drinks sweating onto your legs. She disappeared after a house party at the end of August. Everyone shared the same 3 pictures of her on their stories. We held our breath for a week, and then we let it out in this quiet, guilty way, because as long as it wasn't one of ours, you could go back to calculus. 2 weeks later, a girl from our school didn't show up to first period. Her name was Maddie. We had gym together freshman year. She always kept her hair in a messy bun and her mascara thick enough to count as armor. She had a brother in my class, Jacob, this big guy who wore flannel even when it was hot. Jacob was in my English lit class with Harlan. He came in second period with eyes like bruises and sat without taking off his backpack. Harlan noticed. He always noticed. After class, he asked Jacob to stay back. I hovered, pretending to shove papers in my bag slower than time itself. I shouldn't have, and I did. It's one of those receipts I mentioned. I heard Harlan lower his voice and say, "Do you want me to call someone?" "We can do that together." Jacob said, "No." They already know. The cops checked in on everyone, asked where people were on such and such a date, said the words, "Just routine," like that made anything less terrifying. They set up a table in the cafeteria one day for tips, which had the opposite effect of what they wanted because nobody wants to walk up to a cop in front of their peers and say, "I saw something." Someone started a rumor that a white pickup truck had been seen near where Lily's phone last pinged. The rumor grew a dent in the tailgate. The dent grew a sticker of a skull. That's how rumors work. They keep accessorizing themselves until they feel like a person you could blame. Harlan handled all of this like a person you wanted to be near in a storm. He made space in the lab for anyone who didn't want to sit in loud rooms. He let kids put their heads down as long as they kept their earbuds low. He brought in this old analog TV he found at a thrift store and played old silent films during lunch, like Chaplin and Méliès, stuff with big expressions and no dialogue, so nobody had to pretend they weren't listening for their name in someone's whisper. He said stories existed before there were words for them, and we could just watch shapes move across a screen and remember that people have done that for 100 years. In October, he announced a special project for film studies, a portrait of the town. He said we were all going to capture an ordinary day in ordinary places. Gas station, grocery store, park, school hallways, the weird antique store that never seemed to sell anything. And then we'd cut them together into a 10-minute short called On Any Given Day, like we were making a love letter to a place that rarely gets one. He talked about how documentaries aren't just facts, they're arrangements. and that what you leave out is as important as what you put in. He asked me to lead the edit. He said I had good hands, which made me stand a little taller, and then hate myself for that later. We shot everything. We did it the way he taught us. I got bored in an aisle at Savemore filming a man counting cans, and then realized the rhythm of his hands was hypnotic. Drew and Evan did a time-lapse of the park from sunrise to the lunchtime dog parade. Shay got permission to shoot in the roller rink during disco night, lights scattering like confetti that had forgotten how to fall. We shot lockers slamming, a bus driver checking her mirrors with tenderness, a chess club match that was so intense you could have scored it like a fight. It felt good to have a project that felt like it mattered and didn't at the same time. One night, Harlan texted our group chat and told us to meet him at the old rail bridge just outside town at 10 p.m. Best light, he said. He wasn't wrong. The full moon made everything look expensive. The bridge was closed to cars, but people walked it sometimes, even though there were signs telling you not to, because the boards made this hollow sound beneath your feet like a warning. We set up the tripod and did some long exposures of headlights washing under the bridge like schools of fish. We took turns holding our breath and trying not to shiver when the wind came through like it remembered we were alive. Harlan told us about how real night shoots are the worst, because every second you aren't rolling is $10, lighting is wasting. He filmed us as much as we filmed the road. Behind the scenes, he said, half joking. He liked those shots. People doing a thing that wasn't the thing. It was after midnight when he finally said, "That's enough," and clapped the air like a coach. "You've earned breakfast." We ended up at a diner that was only open that late on Fridays for the bar crowd. We ordered pancakes the size of our faces and eggs that tasted like the griddle had history. Harlan told us about his failed short films, his first job in a wedding video company, where the bride punched the groom in the parking lot, and he captured it in 4K, and then had to pretend he didn't. He had a million stories like that. He made us laugh. It felt like we were older, like we'd been let in on a secret. At one point, I went to the bathroom and, on the way back, looked through the little hallway to the kitchen where Harlan stood near the swinging door talking to the waitress. He wasn't flirting. He had that same gentle, half-tilted head he used with us, like he was curious, like what she was saying was the most important thing he'd hear that night. That was the night I decided if I got into state college with a film program, I'd go. That's also the last night I remember going to sleep without needing the TV on for company. 2 weeks later, the police found a body in the woods outside town. It was Lily, not Maddie. I don't have the words to make that sentence softer. The town didn't either. They closed school for a day and opened it again, because what else do you do? The principal gave an assembly that felt like a voicemail you didn't want to leave. The police presence on campus doubled. You couldn't step outside for a breath without having to explain you weren't in crisis. People cried in bathrooms and missed class, and came back with faces like road maps. We finished the town portrait, because finishing is something you do when you don't know what else to do. The edit was good. Not because I'm incredible or anything, but because we had so many tiny, precise moments that added up to a picture that was neither an accusation nor a love story, just a whole thing where people made their small ways through hours. Harlan stood behind me as I exported, one hand on the chair, and said, "This is what I want." You didn't lie. You didn't force meaning on anything. He asked me to copy the project to a hard drive for him. I did. He put the drive in the inside pocket of his jacket like it was valuable. We presented the film at the Winter Arts Night in December. People clapped in that small-town way, polite and supportive, like they understood they were clapping for us trying. Parents told us it was beautiful, and it made them cry. It felt like we gave something back, even if it was just 10 minutes of remembering you can arrange life into something that makes a shape. Maddie was still missing in January. Her brother stopped coming to school. His friends wore hoodies with her name ironed onto the back in varsity font, like maybe treating a girl like a team would make her return to the field. Someone started a fundraiser for the family. Everyone reposted the link. Searches were organized and people brought granola bars and flashlights like they were going camping with 100 strangers. Harlan showed up at one of the searches in a puffy blue jacket, offered to organize groups, asked if people were okay to be in the woods without freaking out. He had a way of making chaos feel rehearsed. That's a compliment I would use for him in any other world. This is where the story starts to bend, and you have to decide whether I'm seeing patterns because I want to, or because they're there. I get it. If I were you, I wouldn't trust me either. Harlan started assigning more personal projects. He called them confessional constraints. Write a 2-page story about the thing you'll never say out loud. Shoot a 2-minute video with no faces in it that makes us feel fear. Record a voiceover of a person you care about without telling us who they are, and edit it over footage that contradicts their words. It was cool. It was also, I don't know. He was always like that. But now, with the missing posters on the doors, it felt like he was asking us to put our hands near a wound. One night in early February, I stayed late to color correct Shay's short. Harlan was there, his office light on, door open like always. He left around 7 with this, "Don't burn the place down, Ramirez," that he always said because I once spilled coffee near the keyboard sophomore year. I said, "Wouldn't dream of it," like I always did. He laughed. He left. I stayed. At 8:30, the custodian came by to lock up. He knows me. He likes that I say hi to him instead of pretending he's a robot who cleans while we sleep. He said, "10 minutes, kid." I don't want Holbrook yelling at me for missing his shows. Holbrook is the principal. He calls all school events shows because I think he dreams of Broadway. I exported Shay's file and sent her a done text with a fire emoji. When I packed up, I noticed Harlan's door was still open. I don't know why I looked in. Maybe because it was a ritual. Maybe because I wanted to see if he'd left his mug again so I could text him a picture and say, "Found your fuel," and he'd reply with that coffee cup emoji he overused. I glanced in and saw his desk clear, except for his battered cannon, the strap coiled neatly like a sleeping snake. He never left it at school. That pinged something in me. The way a house feels wrong when a picture on the wall is crooked. I picked it up, said, "Oops," to nobody, and planned to drop it at the office so they could lock it with lost and found until morning. The camera was lighter than mine. He had older gear because he said the lens matters more than the body, and the story matters more than either. I don't know why I flipped the power on. I don't know why my thumb slid to play. Curiosity is a muscle, and mine was ripped from overuse. The last clip came up on the tiny bad screen, date stamped from that afternoon. It was the hallway outside our classroom. Nobody in the shot. The camera was waist height, maybe placed on a locker shelf. The audio was muffled. A voice said, "You sure?" And another voice laughed. Then Harlan walked past the frame in his blue jacket. He looked like himself. He said, "Eyes on me. almost under his breath, and then the clip ended. I scrolled back. Clip before that. Dark room, handheld, the scratchy sound of fabric rubbing the mic. No useful video, just motion blur, but this low, breathy voice, his voice, saying, "There we are." Another clip. A girl's shoes, scuffed white sneakers on grass. "Watch your step," he says, which is such a Harlan thing to say. And then, "It's okay. We're okay." The camera tilts up, quick. Not enough to see a face, just skirtum, the edge of a hoodie. Then static. Then black. I stood there in the doorway like a thief who doesn't know why they have stolen what they've stolen. I felt hot. You know that feeling when your cheeks go red before your brain catches up, like embarrassment is outrunning your thoughts? That. I told myself it was nothing. Harlan filmed everything. He had 1,000 clips of our hands, the back of our heads, the way light hits a locker latch. But I also felt like I was looking into something that didn't want to be looked into. Which is a stupid sentence. Cameras want to be looked into. That's their whole deal. I scrolled back again. There were dozens of clips like that. Feet, corners of rooms, a car seat, the inside of a pantry, like the camera had been left on during a move. His voice whispering. Other voices too. One of them said, "Are you filming?" And he said, "We're always filming." And I laughed, because that was exactly the kind of thing he'd say for a teaching moment. And then I didn't laugh, because my hands were trembling. And I thought, why is everything so careful? The room got very quiet. The hallway outside sounded like it was in another building. I backed out like leaving a sleeping baby alone. I turned off the camera. I told myself I was overreacting. I put the Canon on his chair, like a person leaving milk out for a cat. And I left the way you leave a church after knocking over a candle. Slow enough to pretend control. Fast enough to prove you don't have any. I didn't sleep that night. I lay there with my phone on my chest and the ceiling fan cutting circles into the dark. I kept hearing his voice in those clips. Not what he said, but how he said it. He had a camera voice. You know how some people talk to dogs in a voice you would never use in conversation? He had that voice for the lens. It was pitched lower, comforting, always steady, like he was in charge of time. Once you hear a person's camera voice, you realize they've been practicing it when you weren't around. I kept telling myself I should tell someone, but tell what? I looked through my teacher's camera because I was nosy and I didn't like the vibes. Also, he let us use his gear all the time. I had no right. Also, I loved the guy, which is a hard sentence to type. But there it is. Not romantic love. The other kind. The kind where you trust someone with your raw footage and your half-thoughts, and the part of you that believes you might make something worth watching. I told Shay the next day because if I didn't tell someone, the thoughts would keep breeding. We were sitting in the parking lot before first period in her mom's Prius, which always smelled faintly like oranges. I told her about the clips. I told her about the shoes and the voice. She said, "That's creepy." I said, "It could be nothing." She said, "It could be something." We sat there with that. She drummed her fingers on the steering wheel. "You think we should tell like Holbrook?" I pictured Holbrook blinking at us with his fish eyes and saying words like allegations and serious and inappropriate. I pictured Harlan being called into the office to find out his favorite student snooped and now thought he was weird. The shame felt like a physical thing, like I'd swallowed a paperclip. "No," I said. which is the moment I hate the most when I rewind all this. Not because it would have fixed everything, but because it would have made me a different person. Shay said, "Then we watch." She said it like that, simple, decisive. We pay attention. If it gets more creepy, we do something. Promise? She held out her pinky like we were 6. I hooked mine to hers like we were 6. We watched. We didn't like what we saw, but it was all small things, contextless. Harlan had his camera voice more often. He started showing up in places and saying that he was there by coincidence, which maybe he was. He held Maddie's mother's hand while she cried in the hallway and looked like a picture of compassion, and I felt this intrusive thought like, that's a good shot. He stayed late. He got to school early. He was always tired but never irritated, which is not normal for a teacher in February. One afternoon, he asked me to help him carry boxes to the storage room behind the auditorium. It's a weird space back there, full of props from decades of school plays, fake swords and costumes that smell like dust and tears. He set down the box, wiped his hands, and said, "What do you see, Ramirez?" I thought it was a trick. He loved pop quizzes about nothing. "I see a room full of ghosts," I said, trying to be charming, and he smiled the way people smile when they're glad you didn't disappoint them. "Look closer," he said. He pointed at a rack of old clothes covered in plastic. "See that?" It was a VHS camcorder on a shelf above the clothes, covered in a soft layer of grime. He lifted it, heavy in his hands, and blew dust off slow so it didn't just fly in our faces. "This is a dinosaur," he said, reverent. "I used one like this my first year teaching." He set it on a rolling cart, plugged it into the wall with a frayed cable he found in a box like he knew it would be there. The little screen flickered on, blue. He hit eject. There was a tape inside. "I wonder what's on here," he said. We both know VHS tapes are treasure chests. They are always something. He pushed the tape back in and hit play. The screen showed a school play from before I was born, the kind where kids wave at the camera and the camera operator keeps forgetting to zoom out. It was nothing. It was everything. It was so normal that it made me feel stupid for expecting blood to drip out of the speaker. I laughed. He laughed. "Memory," he said, patting the camcorder like a dog. "It's all just memory." I think he knew I knew. That's the worst part. He knew I was watching, and he wanted me to watch. He wanted me to see how careful he was. He wanted me to admire it. In March, Drew and Evan disappeared for a weekend. Not like vanished. Their mom posted a photo of them at their cousin's in Vermont. But when they came back, they were different. More quiet. They sat on either side of me in film studies, and I could feel them thinking, like actual heat. After class, Evan asked me to come to the parking lot. He never asked for anything from anyone. He was the kind of kid who just did his stuff. He handed me a USB stick. "Tell me if this is nothing," he said, almost angry. We sat in my car with the USB in my laptop because at this point our lives were a TV show we couldn't turn off. The drive had one folder. The folder had one video file. The video had no audio and no opening titles because he's not an amateur. The first shot was the old rail bridge at night, the one we filmed at, and children's chalk drawings on the planks that looked ghostly under the moon. The shot panned like a body turning over in its sleep. It settled on a shadow leaning on the railing. You could tell it was Harlan even though it was just a silhouette. The way he holds himself. You know a person's posture like you know a song's rhythm. He was holding his cannon. He lifted it like an offering. He pointed it down at the water, then at the path leading into the trees. He was filming. Of course he was. Then the camera moved to the left, slow, almost dreamlike. It framed the opposite railing where someone had tied a ribbon. Pink. It fluttered in the wind. The shot held. And then a figure walked into frame from the path. Small. Hoodie pulled up. The figure leaned against the rail a few feet from Harlan and kicked the board like kids do when they're waiting. You couldn't see a face. You could see the nervous foot. You could see shoulders that didn't know how to be confident. Harlan said something. The figure nodded. Harlan stepped closer. The camera drifted toward them like it was a person trying to eavesdrop without getting caught. It cut. Not like a camera cut. Like an edit. Like someone took the footage and sliced out pieces only they thought mattered. The next shot was the woods. The sound was still muted, probably in the edit. Moonlight made the trees look like bones. Two shapes moved between trunks. You only saw them when they crossed into lighter patches. Harlan's jacket, the hoodie. At one point, the hoodie stumbled, went to a knee, stood up, brushed their palm on their jeans. Harlan reached out and steadied them. The camera framed that hand, his hand on their elbow, like he was proud of that image. It cut again. Close-up of a zipper being pulled. A bag. I don't want to describe what was inside because it wasn't gore, and that almost makes it worse. It was rope. It was duct tape. It was a folded tarp. Items, inoculated by being ordinary. The shot held just long enough for you to understand without the film telling you what to think. Evan said, "There's more." He was whispering, even though we were in the privacy of my car, with the engine off and the windows fogging slightly from our breath. He scrubbed the timeline forward, and I watched my entire insides tilt. There was a girl's mouth. It filled the frame. It was lit by a flashlight the way horror movies do when they want you to see pores and panic. Her lips were chapped. A strip of tape covered them. She was making noise behind it, but we couldn't hear. The shot trembled slightly, maybe from breath, maybe from something else. The camera dropped lower. A hoodie was bunched against her chin. Her eyes were closed. Her lashes were wet. Then a hand came into the frame, and you could tell by the scar on the knuckle that it was Harlan's because he told us once he cut it on a can when he was a kid. His hand stroked her hair back from her forehead like a brother would in a hospital room. He said words we couldn't hear. The camera pulled back enough to show the tarp beneath her, blue, crinkled, the duct tape on her wrists. I think I stopped breathing. In the memory, I'm holding my breath for the entire rest of the video, like that would keep anything worse from happening. It cut again, mercifully, to trees. Just trees for a long time. Then the shot tilted up to the sky, and you could see a plane crossing, tiny and uncaring. Then black. Evan closed the laptop. Neither of us moved. He said, "It was on my porch." His voice broke on porch. "This morning, in an envelope. No note. We thought about the obvious things you think about. Go to the police, go to the principal, delete it, make copies, run." I staticked between options like a radio stuck between stations. We went to Shay. She closed the door to her room and put a towel under it like we were smoking weed, even though we were just bringing in this other kind of smoke. She watched the video with the same posture you have when you're trying not to startle a deer. When it ended, She stood and paced the length of her room 4 times, counting out steps under her breath the way she does when she's writing. She stopped and said, "He sent this." We blinked at her like morons. "What?" "He sent this to you," she said to Evan. "He sent it because we're his audience." She looked at me when she said that, and I felt myself flinch. "He wants us to see how good he is." The nausea was dizzying. She was right. I knew it. Out loud I said, "We should call someone." She said, "We will. But if he sent this to us, he's telling us he knows us. He might know we're moving. He might be watching our doors. We have to be smart." Being smart felt like being a coward. It felt like being careful in a fire. But she was right. We made copies. We put the USB back in the envelope and put it on Evan's porch again, in case that meant anything to whoever was keeping score. We slept at Shay's that night, because her parents were home and asleep by 10, and we told ourselves nothing bad could happen in a house with snoring parents and a dog that growled at leaves. Nobody slept. We watched each other pretend to sleep. I took the video to the police the next day. I didn't go to the front desk and say, "Here's our teacher." I went to the detective who had visited our school, a woman named Alvarez who had eyes like she had seen every kind of bad and knew how to keep standing. I said we found it. I said it was on a bench at the park. I lied with the conviction of a kid who has never lied about anything that mattered. I felt like she could see through me to the bones of the lie. She watched. She didn't react. She watched it again. She paused. She wrote down time codes like people in movies do, except this was not a movie and nobody would yell cut if I got too scared. She asked me if I knew who the people were. I said no. Not because I didn't know one of them, because knowing and telling are different kinds of knowing, and I was not brave in the way I want to be when I remember this. She asked me if I knew anything about the place. I said the old bridge looked familiar, but there are a million bridges. She looked at me for a long time that made me want to confess things I hadn't done just to fill the silence. She said, "You did the right thing bringing this in," which was supposed to make me feel okay. It didn't. The cops got busy in a way that made the air feel metallic. More cars around campus, more plainclothes in hallways who look exactly like cops, even if they're wearing hoodies. Harlan was calm. He taught his classes like a person balancing heavy things in their hands. Careful, upright, smile small at the corners. He didn't look at me differently, which was somehow worse than if he had. Sometimes he'd glance at the door like he expected a cue. Sometimes he'd press his lips together in a way that read, on camera, like concern. If I were editing his day, I would have cut in a shot of his hands, which were always clean, nails trimmed. A week later, they found another video. Not we. They. The school. Someone emailed a link to the principal's office. No note, just a subject line. For your archives, Holbrook is not a threaded person. He does not keep things in his head. But he knew to forward it to the police, and to shut his office door, and to not leave until they got there. After school, rumors spread like blood in water. People said a teacher was involved, which is one of those rumors that shows up fast, because it's obvious and true in general ways that have nothing to do with what's real. Someone said they saw a guy in a suit walk out of Harlan's room with a coil of cable like a trophy. Someone else said Harlan left at lunch and didn't come back. That was true. He didn't come back. A special announcement came on the intercom like a horror movie. Feedback. and then a voice asking us to stay calm. We were released class by class to the parking lot where parents were waiting with faces that were trying to be not faces. I stood in the hallway outside the editing lab as a police officer unspooled yellow tape like he was roping off a magic trick. I saw Alvarez walk past me without seeing me, which felt like looking at someone on a TV through your own TV. I wanted to grab her arm and say, "We have to move faster," like I knew how fast he was moving. Which I didn't, because we were not the ones holding the camera. My mom drove me home and kept touching the back of my head like I was younger. She made spaghetti and stirred the sauce like it had wronged her. I showered because it seemed like an action. I got into my pajamas and stared at the ceiling again. The house felt like a submarine. The windows had become screens. Every light switch clicked too loud. Around midnight, my phone buzzed. It was a text from an unknown number. It said, "Look up." I sat up like my body was a puppet and someone had yanked the strings. The house was quiet except for the refrigerator. The dog's nails clicked on the hallway. I typed, "Who is this?" and then deleted it because he would love that. Another text. "Eyes on me." I didn't want to move. I wanted to be a picture, but something made me turn. My bedroom window faces the street. My blinds were down. A shadow moved across them. Not a person's shadow. A smaller, tighter shape. The lens hood of a camera, black and round like an eye. It floated left to right, slow. It stopped in the middle of the window and held there. I could hear my own heartbeat as a sound in the room. My mouth went dry. I went very still, like he was a predator that reacted to motion, like this was a nature documentary about me. I did not open the blinds. I did not scream. I reached, very slow, for my phone. My fingers were stupid. I typed 911, and then I didn't hit call, because in that second, I was sure the sound would make whoever was outside lunge at the glass. The lens shadow slid away like it had seen enough. I waited 30 seconds because that's how long the bravest person I could imagine would wait. Then I ran into the hall yelling for my mom. The dog barked with such violence that I was suddenly, painfully in love with him. The police came. They walked the yard with flashlights, and the neighbor's porch light was on, and people stood in their windows pretending not to. The dog sniffed air and peed on the hydrangeas. Alvarez came too. She looked at the window and then at me, and she put her hand on my shoulder, and she didn't move it for a second, which is a thing a person does when they want to share some of their steadiness with you. I cried then. Not pretty. No soundtrack. All the terror I had neatly packaged leaked out. I hated that I cried. I also loved that I was still a person who could cry. By morning, Harlan was wanted for questioning. That's how they phrased it on the news. Everyone knew what that meant. They had searched his classroom and his apartment. They found electronic equipment, which is such a non-sentence it makes me angry. Alvarez came by our house. She asked me to tell her everything I had seen on his camera in February. I told her, and then I told her about the texts. She asked to see my phone. She asked if I had ever given my number to Harlan. I said yes. He had the class group chat. She asked if I had ever been alone with him in a car. I said yes, after shoots, once or twice. She asked me if he had ever touched me. I said no. And then I felt guilty for the people who couldn't say no. She nodded in that sad way that says thank you, and I'm sorry. At the same time, she told us to go stay with my aunt for a few days, which we did. Our house felt like it had been opened like a letter. They caught him 2 days later. Not in town. At a motel off the highway near the state line. The night clerk recognized his face from the news and kept his cool long enough to hand him a room key and then go into the back and call the police like he was a spy. I wonder if that guy thinks of himself as a hero now. I hope he does. I hope he has a drink named after him somewhere. The news said Harlan didn't resist, which makes me ill because he never had to be the big guy in a room with actual muscle. He had other kinds of power. When they searched his car, they found a box of tapes. Actual tapes. Mini DV, the kind you used in older digital camcorders. They found hard drives too. Lots. Labeled with dates and short words like park and bridge and kitchen, which is boring in a list and terrifying when you imagine the edit. They found a map with pins. They found a bag. You can imagine the rest. They found Maddie. I won't type the details. You can look them up if you're that kind of person. And if you are, I'm sorry for your life. I'm not trying to be holier than you. I have watched too many things I shouldn't. But I won't put those words in my mouth again. What I will say is, he documented everything. Not everything. He wasn't an idiot. But enough. Enough to tell a story. Not a confession. A film. He made films about what he did. He made himself into an auteur of horror, an artist of harm. He framed fear and quieted sound. He orchestrated movement. He made the audience complicit. He sent us a cut like a director sending dailies to a producer. We were supposed to nod at his craft. People called him a monster because that's easier than calling him a teacher. I understand. I have called him worse in my head at 3 a.m. But here's the thing I can't unknow. His voice got into us because we let it. Not on purpose. Not because we were naive. Because we wanted to be seen. And he had a way of looking that felt like salvation. That's how he did it. Not by jumping out of bushes. By offering the camera and saying, "Look up." We did. That's not an accusation. It's an anatomy. The trial was a year later. He pled not guilty at first, which felt like a scene he was directing. The outrage, the victims' families, the how dare he. Then his public defender did the smart numbers in the back room with the prosecutors, and he changed his plea to guilty on some counts to avoid the needle. There were too many counts. The number of separate charges felt like a stack of paper you could hurt someone with. They asked me to testify about the video on my porch. I did. I wore a suit I borrowed from my uncle, and it fit badly in the shoulders. The courtroom smelled like carpet and old men. When they called me, I walked like I was balancing a book on my head. I looked everywhere but at him. When they asked me to identify him, I said, in the tiniest voice I've ever used in public, "That man?" And I pointed, and then I looked by accident. He looked exactly like himself. That's the part I want to underline. He looked like the guy who taught you the rule of thirds. He looked like the guy who told you your story mattered. He looked like an advertisement for mentorship. When it was over, and the judge said numbers that meant life, there was this release in the room like a held-back tide finally finding a break in the seawall. Some people cried. Some people cheered. I stood in a hallway and felt like a plug had been pulled in my stomach and everything inside was draining slow. Shay hugged me so hard I thought my ribs would bend. Evan and Drew stood behind her, awkward in suits, trying to be small in a room that doesn't allow small. Misha had a press badge. She didn't look at us because she doesn't mix work with life, which is how she stays sane. Alvarez shook my hand and said, "You were brave," and I liked that she didn't say "are" like it's a permanent state. Brave was a verb for a day. That should be the end. That's the version where you roll credits, and 2 years later you make a thoughtful podcast about the ethics of true crime. But here's what I haven't told you yet. The part that makes my fingertips go cold when I type it even now. A month after the trial, I got a certified letter. It was one of those envelopes that feel serious, with green and white stickers and a tracking number. I signed for it even though I knew what it was would be bad. Inside was a small black SD card taped to a note card. On the card, in Harlan's neat teacher handwriting, was a line, "For the archivist." No other words. No return address. The postmark was from the city where the prison is, which doesn't mean much because anyone could have mailed it from there. But I knew. I did not call Shay. I did not call Alvarez. I sat on my bed with the blinds open and the dog asleep on my feet, and I held the SD card in my hand like a coin you find in the street that might be a clue or might just be money. I told myself to throw it away. I told myself to burn it. I told myself to walk into the police station and hand it over without knowing. I told myself 1,000 smart things, and then I did the thing I knew I would do the moment I touched it. I slid it into my laptop. There was one file, no date, no metadata. Clever. It opened and showed a black screen for a long time, so long that I thought it was a joke, and then I realized that's what he wanted me to think. The first image was my own face, not live. From the night the camera shadow crossed my blinds. He had filmed me through the crack between the slats when I stood up. It wasn't a perfect shot. It wasn't framed the way he would have liked. But it was enough. My eyes were wide. My mouth was just a little open the way your mouth opens when you're trying to breathe quiet. My hair made a shape I didn't recognize. He held on the shot. Then he cut to me and Shay and Evan in the car watching the USB for the first time. He had a camera on us. He filmed the back of our heads through the rear windshield from a car parked behind us on the street. He filmed the way our shoulders hunched when we leaned forward. He filmed the way my hand found the back of Shay's neck without me noticing. He filmed us, filming him. The next shot was my mom's stirring sauce, shot through our kitchen window from the backyard, the angle low, respectful like he thinks of himself as respectful. Then me, leaving the police station with a folder under my arm. Then the three of us leaving school and crossing the street and almost getting hit by a Honda because we were too full of ourselves to look. Then my bedroom window again, the blinds a pattern across the image like prison bars. Then black, then words, center screen, white on black. On any given day. I stopped the video. My throat hurt the way your throat hurts after you puke. My hands had become claws around the edges of my laptop. I had the urge to throw it on the floor and step on it like it was a spider. I sent the file to Alvarez. I wrote, "Received this today." She replied fast, "Do not watch. Will come pick it up. I'd already watched." I told her. She didn't scold me. She said she'd be there in 10. She arrived in 6. She took the card like she was taking a live grenade from a child. She asked if I wanted to write a statement, and I said yes, because if there is a thing you can do that counts as doing something, you do it like you're thirsty and it's water. She said the video was evidence of stalking, proof of continued obsession. They could use it to keep him from ever seeing the outside of a cell. I said he was already never seeing the outside of a cell. She said, "It helps," and I believed that she needed that to be true. For a while, things quieted. That's a boring sentence, but it's the truth. People moved away. People got jobs. People had babies. The town stopped flinching when it saw an old Subaru with a dent in the tailgate. I went to state school for film because I had momentum and didn't know how to stop. Shay did go to NYU and wrote a short that made me cry for the right reasons. Evan got into sound design and started wearing expensive headphones and happy sweaters. Drew moved west and makes trail maps and sends pictures of mountains like he's reminding us that big things exist that aren't bad. I make documentaries, not the kind that solves murders. I make small things about small places. I made one about the custodian at our school who retired after 30 years and lives alone with 2 cats and asks his neighbors if they need help with their gutters and never charges them if they can't pay. I made one about the guy who runs the roller rink and writes poems on receipts. I make films about people who are not scared. Or maybe I make films about people who are scared and do what they do anyway. Same difference. Sometimes when I'm shooting, I realize my hand on the camera is exactly his hand on a different camera. The knuckles line up. The way I steady my breath before I hit record is the way he steadied his. It's a terrible inheritance. It's also just technique. I can hold both of those truths in my hand and not throw up now. Most days. Last spring, I was interviewing a woman on her porch about the garden she started after her husband died. The light was doing a soft edge thing through the lilacs. My battery indicator blinked red. I reached into my bag for a spare. I pulled out a battery, and with it, something else rattled and hit the deck with a sound I've tried to come up with a word for. Not a coin, not plastic. It was an SD card, a black one with a red stripe. My heart did the bad jump. I picked it up between finger and thumb like a dead thing and held it up to the light. It had no label. It looked exactly like every card I own because I buy them in packs of 4 and lose 2 and wash one in my jeans and keep the last one forever. I told myself it was mine. It was. Probably. I told myself I was fine. I was not. I finished the interview. I said thank you to the woman with the lilacs. I got in my car and locked the doors behind me. I slid the card into my laptop and held my breath. It had footage from a birthday party I shot in March. A backyard with kids and cake and a dog and a bandana. I laughed and cried at the same time, which is such a cliche that I nearly apologized to the empty car for being so basic. On the way home, a truck pulled behind me at a distance that felt intentional. It stayed at the same distance for a few miles. I kept checking the rear view like a teenager with weed under her seat. Finally, it turned into a gas station, and I exhaled the way you do when you pass a cop on the highway who doesn't pull into your lane. When I got home, there was a box on my front step. Brown cardboard. No return address. My dog sniffed it and wagged like it was the most normal thing in the world, because he is who he is. I texted Alvarez even though it's not her job anymore to deal with my paranoia. She texted back, "You can open packages, Ramirez." She emojis a smile that looks like teeth. I brought the box inside and put it on the kitchen table and stared at it like it was a person. Then I opened it because you can't live like that. Inside was a camera lens. Not new. Old, heavy. The kind with glass that feels like skin when you touch it. There was a note. It said, "For the documentary you were going to make sophomore year about your grandfather's hands. Use a 50mm, I said. This is close enough. H." It was his lens. I knew it the way you know the taste of the cereal you ate every morning as a kid. He had told me a 50mm makes things look honest because it's close to the way the human eye sees. He said things like that all the time and I believed him. The lens in the box was a 58mm. Close enough. I didn't call Alvarez. I didn't call Shay. I wrapped the lens in a towel and put it in my freezer because my brain thought freezer, and I obeyed. Then I stood there with my hands on the counter and laughed like a crazy person because who puts a lens in a freezer? The cold does nothing to it. Nothing. But for 20 seconds, I was a general who had sent the bomb to Siberia. I sat down. I took the lens out of the freezer and put it on the table. I stared at it. I told myself that this was not Harlan. He did not have access to the mail. He did not have access to my address in a way I hadn't already given the world 1,000,000 times. This was some cruel person who got off on sending victims keepsakes. I told myself the healthy adult thing to do was to give it to the police and not complicate my own life. I told myself so many things that the card in my head filled up with B-roll and no story. In the end, I did the simplest thing. I put the lens in a Ziploc, and I took it to the station, and I handed it to a man at a desk who had paperwork in his eyes. He took it like he was taking recycling. He didn't ask why my hands were shaking. He didn't say, "You're doing the right thing." He said, "We'll log it." And I believed him. I left and got a coffee and sat in my car and watched people walk in and out of the grocery store like they had forgotten their lists as soon as they crossed the threshold. Normal. Boring. Human. That's the footage I try to hold now. If you need me to be honest about the worst thing, it's this. Some nights, when I can't sleep, I open my laptop and scrub through my own footage and imagine how he would cut it. I know where he'd pause. I know which shot he'd say is the human moment. I hate that I know that. I hate that it's also why my work is good. He did get into my head. He set up a tripod there and he left. I live with it. I move around it. I try not to make eye contact with the lens he left behind. Last week, a new kid at the community center where I volunteer asked me how to make his videos look cinematic. He was 14. He had that hunger in his face like the world isn't enough unless you can frame it. I told him about light. I told him about framing. I told him about how the best shots often come after you think you're done, because people relax when they think you're not looking. Then I caught myself. I heard the voice in my head saying, "Look up, eyes on me." And I swallowed like there was a bone in my throat. I said, "The most important thing is that your people feel safe. The story doesn't matter if they don't feel safe." He nodded like he believed me. He is the age I was when I believed everything my teacher said. I want to be the person he remembers hearing in his head years from now. I want my voice to live there instead of Harlan's. I think that's how I win. Not with a conviction. Not with an SD card. With a kid who remembers that we are not hunters because we hold cameras. There's no twist here. I keep expecting there to be one when I tell the story. That's just the movies talking. This isn't a movie. It's a life. It's a series of shots you can't reshoot. If you want a last line, here it is. Last night, my dog barked at the front window. I froze because you always freeze first. Then I went to the window and looked out, and there was nobody there. Just the reflection of my own face in the glass, and the red light of my camera charging on the table behind me, glowing like a tiny patient eye. I turned it off. I sat down. I picked up my notebook and wrote a list of places my next documentary could start. The top of the list said, the roller rink. Beneath it, the garden with the lilacs. I didn't write his name anywhere on the page. He doesn't get to be the story anymore. I do. And I've learned to look up without obeying him. I never used to pay attention to the exact sound rain makes on different materials until that night. On asphalt, it's a hiss, like the road is trying to steam itself clean. On rooftops, it's drumming, impatient and hollow. On glass, it's knuckles. On my car, that night, it was all of it at once, like the town had turned into one big instrument and somebody mean figured out how to play. I was driving delivery runs for a grocery app to make rent. It was good money when the weather was bad, because nobody else wanted to go out. That Thursday had been a gray smear since noon, and by 8 the sky had given up pretending and broke open. Streets blurred. Every curb was a small waterfall. Wipers on Max didn't even keep up. They just passed the job between them and failed together. I was halfway through a 6-order batch when the app did that chime and dropped a priority on me. Same direction as my next drop, different neighborhood, big tip attached. The pin landed out beyond where the streetlights get stingy, past the old rail yard. I'd been there once in daylight for a mattress delivery and remembered 2 things. 1, the houses were all unreasonably far from the road like they were shy. And 2, even in bright sun, the place felt like dusk. Some parts of town have that built into them. I took it anyway. Money's money and rain makes bad decisions look reasonable. I swung onto Harbor, then into the industrial stretch where the drainage is a rumor. My tires pushed water in twin fans. A bottle rolled across the lane like a little ghost. The radio was on low, a DJ telling a storm story like he was auditioning to be a character in my night, and I turned him down because I didn't need narration. The address was 417 Larkspur. My GPS said I was there, but all I saw was a dark strip of overgrown lawn, 2 trees fat with wet leaves, and the smudge of a house way back, like it regretted being built. I idled and squinted through the rain. The porch light flicked on, off, on again. Not fast, not like a signal, just once, twice, like someone testing the switch. I grabbed the paper bags from the passenger seat and tucked them against my hoodie. Hood up, head down, boots already wet just thinking about it. The driveway was basically a creek. I splashed up it, and the rain needled my ears and found its way down the back of my neck. Up close, the house wasn't falling apart exactly, but it had that damp look like a loaf of bread left out too long. As I climbed the porch steps, my shoe slipped, and I put a hand on the post. The wood felt cold and greasy, like something that had been underwater, and only just decided to pretend otherwise. I knocked. No answer. I knocked again, louder. The porch light clicked off and the dark punched every shape into a new shape. I would have left the groceries and sprinted back to the car, but a voice said, "Just a minute," the way people say it when every minute is work. The door opened a little and a woman peered out. She was probably late 30s, hair tied into the messiest bun I've ever seen, cheeks flushed like she'd been in a hot kitchen. She smelled like laundry soap and something metallic underneath. "You made it," she said, and her tone made my chest relax because it sounded normal. Tired, a little embarrassed about the state of the porch. Normal. I thought they'd cancel on me. "Come in, set them on the bench. I'll get you cash for the tip." "I'm good, the app." I started, but she was already gone, door wide open, hall lit deep and yellow like a throat. It wasn't an invitation so much as gravity. The rain got louder behind me, as if to say, "What? You'd rather be out here?" I stepped inside and the air hugged me with that damp old house smell. Not mold exactly, but a cousin. The entry was narrow, stairway to the right. A runner worn down the middle the way it gets when kids launch themselves from 2 steps up. A framed drawing hung crooked. A coat hung on a hook, soaked. I put the bags on a little bench and tried not to drip on anything, which was impossible. "Sorry," she called from deeper in. I had to. Her voice nodded, like she considered lying, and then decided not to. I had to check on something. "No worries," I said, because that's what you say in other people's houses when you don't want to ask what something means. I glanced at the drawing. It wasn't a drawing. It was a topographical map with the lines too close together. The date under it said 1912. The title said Dry Creek Reservoir Project. Someone had circled a spot with a pencil and written home next to it, and then scribbled that word out so hard they'd torn the paper. The woman came back with a crumpled 20 pinched in her fingers, and a small smile like the effort of making it had exhausted her. She wore a rumpled blue sweatshirt with a school logo. Drops from her hair had soaked it darker around the collar. Up close, her eyes were the kind that beg forgiveness before anyone asks for anything. "Please," she said, and pressed the bill into my palm. Her hand was ice cold. "Do you want a towel? You're drenched." "I'm okay," I said automatically, which is the most pointless lie we tell by habit. "Busy night?" She laughed once without joy. "You have no idea." A little noise came from upstairs. Not footsteps. Not exactly. More like weight shifting on a bed. I glanced at the stairs. She saw me glance and her expression did that tight thing faces do when they need to pretend that whatever you heard was a cat, even if the cat died 10 years ago. "My husband's sick," she said too quickly. "He's sleeping." "Of course," I said. I couldn't tell if the quiet settled or just paused. The front door bumped in its frame like the wind had shoulders. A second noise followed from above, softer, almost a breath that had learned to be a floorboard. The woman's smile hardened like she'd put it in the freezer. "Thank you," she said. "Drive safe." Most of the time when people end a conversation like that, you back out the way you came and the moment closes behind you. I wanted that. The rain had other ideas. When I pulled the door open, the wind kicked the edge and it slammed wider against the wall in a way that made the whole house flinch. For a second, the hallway light flickered and showed me everything in hard, stuttered frames. The runner, the map, the hooks, the way the paint on the baseboard had cracked in a spiderweb pattern, like something under it had swelled once and decided not to unswell. "Sorry," I said to the house like that matters. I pulled the door toward me, and that's when I saw there was no chain, no deadbolt, just a keyhole big enough for an old skeleton key, and the faint line where a deadbolt should have been but wasn't, filled with wood putty like a scar. I wasn't thinking about security or ghosts. I was thinking about the very human way someone chooses to remove a lock and then acts surprised when things get in. On the porch, the rain was relentless. I ran for it, head down, counting my steps like they were beads. By the time I reached the car, I was shivering. I cranked the heat and sat there dripping on my seat and watching the house like it was a movie I didn't understand yet. The porch light clicked off again. The app chimed. Another order had landed a mile away, past the rail line. If I took it, I'd have to go around the loop and cut back past Larkspur on my way out. It felt like maybe the night wanted me to stick to this part of the map. I accepted and pulled away. On the next block, the street flooded so deep the water came up over my wheel wells, and my steering got light enough to make my stomach drop. I eased through, and the car grumbled like an old dog, and then caught traction. On the left, a ditch had turned into a stream. On the right, the chain link around the old baseball field shook like teeth. And then the power went out up ahead. Not mine. The town's. The block beyond Larkspur blinked to black, and for a heartbeat the rain fell into a world with nothing to bounce off but itself. Taillights ahead of me glowed like embers, and then vanished. All the small noises got louder. In that weird equalized dark, I heard something I'd missed under the mechanics of the storm. Singing. I nearly laughed at myself because who the hell sings in weather like that? But it wasn't somebody out on a porch drunk on nostalgia. It was higher and farther, and not quite a tune. You know how sometimes wind through certain gaps makes a note? It was like that, if the gap had lungs. I pressed the accelerator because my brain decided suddenly that fast was safer than slow, which is not a choice people make with their frontal lobes. The singing swelled and then thinned like it had turned its head away. By the time I finished the next drop and looped back toward the main road, the power had hiccuped back on. Larkspur looked almost normal again. The house at 417 sat in its pocket of yard, porch light off, inside lights on low, rain carving glittering diagonals in my windshield. I would have kept going if the figure on the porch hadn't lifted a hand. I braked without meaning to. The figure stepped down one step, then another. It was the woman. No coat, just the blue sweatshirt now soaked so badly it clung like a second skin. She didn't wave exactly. She held her hand out, palm up, like she was asking for proof of something. I rolled the passenger window down a crack. Rain tried to crawl in. "Everything okay?" I called, which is the kind of question you ask when you want a stranger to say yes and absolve you of choices. She didn't answer me. She was looking past me, over my shoulder. No, not over, through. Like she could see into my back seat. It made me turn to look even though I knew it would be empty. It was empty. Aside from a crumpled receipt and my hoodie. "Do you hear it?" she asked finally. Her voice had gone flat, like a line on a monitor waiting for a heartbeat. "The singing?" I said. "Because you do stupid things like that when you want to believe you are just imagining in tandem with someone, not actually sharing." Her eyes moved from the back seat to my face, and that look, relief plus fear, made something soft in me stand up. "He hears it," she said, like she was reporting to someone else. She took a breath that made her seem smaller, and then said to me, "Lower." "It started after the first flood this spring. It always starts with singing." "What starts?" I asked, even though I was afraid of her answering. A hard tap hit the roof of my car. Not rain. Heavier. Then another, a foot away. Then a third, slower, like something testing a surface with fingertips. We both looked up as if we'd see a face pressed to the metal. "It comes down the hall," she said. "It stops at the bedroom and asks if I'm awake. If I say I'm not, it waits. If I say I am, it comes in. If I don't say anything." She trailed off and folded her arms so tight I could hear the wet fabric grinding against itself. I don't say anything anymore. The rain pressed insistently against the car door like a dog wanting in. I wanted to drive. I wanted to put Denver or some other enormous distance between me and that porch. Instead, I said, "Do you want me to call someone?" Like a child playing at being a decent adult. "Like who?" she said, not mean, just past the point where suggestions have edges. "A plumber? A priest?" I tried both. One laughed, one didn't, but he never came back. She looked at my door handle the way you look at the idea of touching a hot stove. It wasn't like this when he was alive. It wasn't quiet. I understood what she meant, and didn't want the part of me that understood to be right. "Your husband?" She nodded. He loved storms. He loved the way rain makes you have company whether you want it or not. She blinked rain off her lashes. After he got sick, he would count the seconds between lightning and thunder like a kid. He'd narrate it to the ceiling like he was doing play-by-play. The night it happened, it rained so hard the roof leaked over our bed. He laughed at it. He said, "Well, at least the house is crying with us." He always said dumb things like that. She breathed in. Now the house cries and I don't know who for. I could feel my heart doing that fast, soft flutter that isn't quite fear yet. "Do you have family nearby?" "Not the kind that comes out after midnight for ghosts," she said, and all the matter of fact drained out of her voice, exposing the question underneath. "Will you come inside and help me pretend it's normal?" The singing swelled again. Not from the sky this time, from deeper and closer. I hadn't realized until that second that I'd been hearing it in the gaps of our talk. It had arranged itself around our syllables like a cat around ankles. Now it stepped forward. I turned the key and the engine idled rough, as if offended. The woman took one more step toward the car. Rain had plastered little hairs to her forehead. "I don't want to be in there by myself when it gets to the door," she said. "I can pay you. I can..." She shifted like she'd remembered a performance and should start it. Then she just said, "Please." I killed the engine and got out because there are a few kinds of pleading that make the calories in your body move your feet for you. The rain soaked through my hoodie in 1 second. The porch swallowed us like a mouth. Inside, the hallway light was still on, small and stubborn. The air was warmer than outside and felt used, as if someone had been breathing too close to my skin. Upstairs, something moved. Not footsteps, not the house settling, the sound of a person shifting their weight in surprise. The woman flinched like a violin string pulled too tight and started up the stairs. I followed because leaving her to go alone would have been worse than going where she was going. At the landing, the hall forked. To the right, a door was open on a room with a dresser and a full-length mirror with a dent in the silver at the bottom, where someone must have kicked it once and felt bad about it for years. To the left, a door was mostly closed. From behind it came the sound of water brushing fabric. I don't have a better description. Imagine hand-washing a dress in a tub. That, the wet against the weave. She put her hand on the knob and didn't turn it. "He's not in there," she said like a promise to herself. "He hasn't been for months." She looked back at me. My face must have told her I wasn't going to argue. "It's the lack of sound, mostly." He snored lightly. He hummed when he woke up. He let the kettle scream until it scared him, and then he laughed. It's the lack of all that that makes the other sounds show up. The water brushing fabric sound stopped. Then a voice spoke. A man's voice. "Mara," it said, soft, like he was trying not to wake someone. the way my own name sounds when someone says it from the bathroom at 2 in the morning. The woman looked at me like she expected me to tell her that wasn't her name. "It does that," she whispered, eyes wide and wet. "But it gets it wrong sometimes. He never called me Mara, not once. That was..." She shook her head and swallowed. "That was someone else's name, I think." "Do you want to go downstairs?" I asked, because I didn't want to see what the voice belonged to, if it belonged to anything at all. "It will follow," she said. She closed her eyes, then opened them. "It always does." The voice spoke again. The sound came from behind the wood, but also from somewhere under my shoes. The words were simple. "Can we talk?" it asked, and the "we" made my spine draw itself up like a fence trying to grow. The woman reached for the knob. I put my hand out without thinking and touched her wrist. Her skin was cold and a little slick like the porch post. She looked at my hand, then at my face. "If I don't open it, it knocks," she said, and her voice had shrunk to something almost not there. "If I do, it asks to come in. If I say yes..." She didn't finish, and I didn't make her. We stood like that for a second that felt borrowed. Then the voice, patient, asked again, "Can we talk?" It wasn't threatening. It wasn't dramatic. It was the politest request I've ever heard. We went downstairs. I don't mean we decided. I mean our legs chose and we accepted. At the bottom, the house felt more crowded. The rain had a new note, not louder, just more insistent, the way a song gets when the drummer leans into the hi-hat. In the kitchen, a small light glowed over the stove, the kind you leave on so you can find your way without waking anyone. It turned every droplet into a small gold coin. On the counter sat a kettle. It had a dent at the tip of its spout. The woman fiddled with the knob on the stove and turned the flame up under the kettle. The blue curl licked at the metal. "You used to forget and let it scream," she said. Noise made him feel less alone. I leaned against the doorway and watched the dark window over the sink. Rain slid down it in diagonal lines. Outside, the yard was a shallow pool. A low trickle sounded from a drain I couldn't see. The house breathed around us. The kettle gathered its voice. When it finally did, it wasn't a whistle. It was a wail. The kind kettles make when they've been asked too often to speak for people. It filled the kitchen with this thin, painful sound, and I saw the woman grip the counter like a swimmer holding the edge of a pool during a cramp. Upstairs, something moved toward the stairs. The sound wasn't footsteps, and it wasn't dragging, and it wasn't the wind trying to be human. It was as if the space itself creased. The kettle screamed higher. The rain pushed harder. My heart banged in my throat like it wanted out. "Turn it off," I said without thinking. And she did, and the sudden absence of the sound left us naked with everything else. In that quiet that isn't quiet at all, a shape appeared in the reflection of the window. Not outside, in the glass, the way shadows gather when they decide to cooperate. It wasn't a man, not really. It was the idea of one. Shoulders where shoulders go. A head. A place where hands might be, depending on how kind the world is being. It stood behind the woman in the reflection like a drawing someone had erased halfway, and then regretted. The shape lifted its arm. The woman's hair brushed her neck like fingers had passed through it. I didn't move. I don't know why. I have shouted at football games and thrown myself between a friend and a bad decision, and once pulled a stranger back from stepping into traffic. And I stood there like a photograph, while this gray shape leaned down and pressed itself against the back of a woman whose face went slack with a kind of grief I don't understand. It didn't do anything violent. It didn't even touch her in the way touch makes a dent. It pressed its non-mouth to her ear, the way my husband used to do when he wanted to tell me a joke only I could hear. The shape breathed and the kitchen got colder, and then I heard words through the window glass like they were being spoken in the next room. "It's still raining," the voice said, the same polite tone as upstairs. "Wrong name, right weather. Let me in." The woman closed her eyes, and in that moment, I could see her decide to do something with the rest of her life that would be different than the part up to now. She put her hand flat on the counter, palm down, and said in a voice like tissue paper, "I miss you." She did not say yes. She did not say no. She did not answer the question, which was a kind of answer. The shape held its place in the glass a second longer, then blurred as water smeared its outline, then resolved again, but smaller, like distance had happened in the width of the window. "It's still raining," the voice repeated, softer this time, and for the first time it sounded tired. Not dangerous, just tired. "Let me in." I found my voice somewhere near my knees. "It's not for you," I said, and I have no idea why that's what came out. It sounded stupid and bossy in the kitchen air, but the word "you" wobbled the reflection like a pebble dropped in water. The shape's head turned in the glass, as if it could see me without eyes. The kettle clicked as metal cooled. The fridge hummed to itself, like it had always been our friend. The rain kept playing the song it had started at noon, uninterested in our script. The shape leaned close to the woman again, inches from her ear. She whispered, "I don't know how," and her breath fogged the invisible face briefly, and in that fog I thought I saw features, a jawline I recognized only because I've seen grief sculpt people the same way. Then the fog thinned and the shape didn't reassemble the way it had been. It dispersed into the reflection like smoke. Not gone, just everywhere. We stood there with our hands doing nothing helpful, while the night kept being itself. Upstairs a floorboard settled, and I realized for the first time since stepping in that there was no other sound in the whole house except the storm and the appliances and the small creaks houses do to reassure you they're not dead. No murmured TV from a bedroom, no tappy phone, no sleeping person's cough. It hit me hard then that even if her husband's voice had been perfectly his, even if it had said her right name and told a joke only she would get, this would still be a house with one person in it, and everything else a trick of water. I don't remember deciding to leave. I remember the woman turning off the stove light. I remember her standing in the yellow entry hall with rain leaking around my shoulders and onto the rug. I remember her saying, "Thank you for staying," like I had done anything. I remember thinking how every time it rains a town hard enough, secrets float up like dead fish, and people scoop them up and pretend they are some other kind of thing. When I got back in my car, the radio had mysteriously turned itself up. The DJ was laughing about something dumb, and it sounded obscene. I turned it off and drove in silence except for the rain's opinion of us. At the light on Harbor, a drenched teenager sprinted across in front of me, shoes slapping, hoodie held over his head pretending to be a roof. He was laughing. The pure kind. The kind that made me remember that not all rain collapses people. Some of it just rinses the day off and lets you start over. I went home. My apartment smelled like dog and old coffee and the good kind of tired. I towed my boots off and left a trail of water across the kitchen tile and stood in the dark, listening to my own fridge hum. I didn't sleep. Not really. When I closed my eyes, I saw the reflection in the window and the way it had tried to take shape around her ear. I heard that polite, impossible voice asking permission to do the one thing it didn't deserve. The next morning, the sky had the washed, guilty look weather gets after it's done too much. I drove past Larkspur on my way to the storage facility, because apparently I am the kind of idiot who needs to look at things in sunlight to know they were real. The house sat in a bright puddle of day like nothing had ever occurred to it. A towel hung on the porch rail. The woman wasn't outside. A cardboard box had melted into a collapsed shape on the steps, leftovers from some other life. I almost stopped. But what would I even say? Hey, I don't know what your plan is for Rainbound Ghosts, but I'm around Thursdays. A week later, the app sent me there again. Same address. Same tip set to generous. I accepted because curiosity is a kind of hunger. The porch light didn't blink this time. The door opened before I knocked. The woman looked rested in the way. Only someone who's made a decision looks rested. She took the groceries. She didn't babble. She said, "He's quiet now." I said, "Good." We nodded like two people who had watched the same terrifying movie and didn't want to talk about our favorite scene. As I turned to leave, she said, "I put a new lock on the bedroom door. It doesn't help, but it helps." She laughed at herself, small. I keep the kettle off. I open the windows, even when it's stupid to. I let the rain go where it's going instead of asking it to explain itself. I thought about the reflection in the glass, with no glass anymore. I thought about how voices change when they have nothing to bounce off. "If you need anything," I said, which is a thing nobody knows how to honor. "I'm on the app most nights." "I know," she said, which didn't make sense and made perfect sense. "Drive safe." It rained again that night and the night after, because September had decided to rehearse for November. I made my money. I counted traffic lights. I learned which intersections get lakes. I avoided the rail yard because the whole place seemed to have subscribed to a different weather channel. When I lay down, I counted something else without meaning to. The beats between silence and sound. The little space right before the pipes in my building thunk. The sigh of a neighbor's shower starting. The instant when the refrigerator isn't humming and then is. The place in a night where something decides to announce itself. I still don't know what I heard in that house. I could call it grief, because that's an answer we're allowed. I could call it water, because water gets everywhere and wears every mask. I could call it a voice trying to form itself out of 100 small echoes and failing in a way that made it need us to help. I could call it nothing if I wanted to sleep better. What I do know is this: the rain makes company. Sometimes it's warm, all of us tucked in under the thump and rumble like we've been given permission to be small. Sometimes it's a stranger on a porch with a face you can't quite see, asking you to let them into your kitchen. And sometimes it's the sound of your own name said wrong by a house that has learned too many songs. If I ever end up in a place like that again, I don't think I'll have something wise to say or some trick to offer. I think I'll do what I did. Stand in the doorway and let the kettle speak for a minute, and then turn it off when it gets unbearable. and wait and keep someone company while the weather moves through the old wood of their life. I think I'll drive away after and feel like I left part of my hearing behind, the part tuned to polite voices from behind thin things. I think I'll listen harder to the difference between rain on the roof and rain on the glass, and learn which one sounds like knuckles. Anyway, that's my rainy night story without the lecture. No rules, no list, just a woman, a door, a voice that wanted something it didn't earn, and me, standing there like an idiot with wet sleeves, trying not to mistake the sound of water for permission. If you ever end up on a porch like that, in weather like that, I hope the only song you hear is your own keys rattling in your pocket and somebody inside yelling that the soup's ready. And if it's some other song, the polite kind, the kind that says your name in the wrong voice, I hope you have the sense to stand very still and let it pass like a current you don't need to swim in. It's raining again tonight. I can tell by the way my windows talk. I'll sleep with the radio off. I'll let the fridge keep me company. If the pipes knock, I'll say nothing back. And if I dream of a reflection behind me, I'll wake up and open the window and let the air in until the room is wet with a real, honest kind of cold. Then I'll listen to the part of the night that isn't asking me for anything and be grateful I still know how to hear it.